Hi everyone, welcome to today's guitar lesson. In this lesson I'd like to show you the comping with bass lines jazz guitar technique. Before I begin, if you would like to see the tab and notation for this lesson, if you look below this video, in the about section you'll see a link to a website to an article on my website, and that has all the stuff we're going to be talking about in full notation as well as in tab as well. So if you want to follow along, you can pause the video, get that loaded and then resume on with this lesson. So for the purpose of today's lesson we're going to be looking at comping with bass lines over a 2-5-1 in the key of C. So that's 2 for a bar, 5, a 1. And now this method that I have for using bass lines, it uses quarter notes, and most jazz bass lines use quarter note rhythms. By no means are bass lines limited to just quarter notes, but you know, we're just going to concentrate on them for now. So the method I like to teach, and one that I like to use myself, is we take the first three notes, first three quarter notes, and we only play notes from either the scale or the arpeggio, the chord in content. So 2-5-1 in C, we're going to be looking at playing it up here first. So this D minor 7, if we just play three notes on the lower two strings. By the way, most bass lines we usually play them on just the two lower strings on the guitar. If we get any higher, we just might be getting in the soloist way. So anyway, if we take three notes of this D minor 7 chord, so if we go like a D, E, F, and now the method I have is on the fourth note, the fourth quarter note of the bar, we need to be thinking of getting to the next chord, which in this case is G7. And we want to be trying to get to the root of G7, the G. And one way you can do that is by going to it from a half step above. So if we play the first three notes of that D minor bass line, D, E, F, and then we go a half step above the G on the fourth beat of the bar, that leads us really nicely into the G7. Sorry. That leads us perfectly, and even though that was technically a mistake what I just did, you can use a scale step as well, but just for now we're going to look at it going a half step above, so D, E, F, A flat, G. And now when we're on the G, we can do the same thing again. Play the first three quarter notes from based off the kind of a G scale or an arpeggio, so G, F, that's 1, 2, and then the third note is a D, and now we need to be thinking about getting to the C, so we can go a half step above again. So that'd be, so if we just take that in content together with the first bit, that's a perfectly acceptable jazz walking bass line. And then you can add chords as well. And we'll get into adding chords in a minute, but I just wanted to play the bass line with chords so you can get an idea of how it sounds. So that's from using half step above, and as I mentioned, you can go a half step below. So that'll be using the G flat there to get to the G, and then when you're on the G you can do the same thing, so G, F, D, and then you can go half step below to C. And you can even start to combine both of them and do some from a half step above and others from a half step below. And you can use scale steps above and below, as I did mention earlier. So that should give you a lot to work on in this area of the neck. But when playing bass lines, there's basically two areas that I like to kind of play them in, and in a 2-5-1 situation. And so that's one there, and the second, I like to kind of have walking bass lines going around these chords, and the reason is all my root notes are here. I've got a D there, G, C. I mean, you know, like the root notes are on the two lower strings in this area of the neck. So you can do bass lines here as well. Using the same kind of techniques, and one thing that I like to do, which is quite cool, is to combine the two positions and do something like this. So there I was starting off playing off this kind of chordal D minor shape and then moving up to this G9 shape. So what I did was D, E, F, F sharp, G to get into that G7, and then I could just kind of play off what I usually would in that position to get to the G7 to the C. And that's quite cool because I used a an F sharp as well as an F, so that gives me like a D minor bebop scale kind of sound, which I'm quite fond of that sound. So yeah, I'd say to practice this in both positions, try to get to the root in the ways that I mentioned earlier, from getting there from a half step above and a half step below, and you can use a scale step below and a scale step above. So now I'm just going to pause for a second and I'm going to get a shot on my right hand so we can start to look at adding chords to the bass lines. Okay, so I'm back again now and I've got a shot on the right hand so you can see what I'm doing there. So when you're comping with bass lines, there's basically two techniques, right hand techniques, that jazz guitarists tend to use. And one of them is using fingers and thumb, which I like doing. And to do that, we'll basically use the thumb for bass lines. And then for the chords, we use our fingers. And I like to use 3 fingers, and if I can get the chord in there as well, I'm sort of playing the bass note with my thumb and then using 3 fingers to get these, you know, the meat of the chord. Now, what you've got to do when you're doing this is try and get the chord on the upbeat of the bar. So first of all, I recommend that you just try and play bass notes with your thumb, because that has to feel quite comfortable. And when you can do that, we can start looking at using the fingers. And a cool exercise that I like to teach to use fingers, a practice technique you can use, is to basically use the fingers to try and get the chords on the upbeats. So as we know, bass notes use quarter note rhythms, but the chords, they're pretty much always on the end of 1. I mean, they can be on other beats of a bar, but just for practice sake, it's good to practice the chords on the offbeats. And if you're not used to playing on offbeats before, this might be a bit tricky if you're not used to it, but I've got a cool exercise. So what you just do is you play the root note, you know, let's just use one chord for now, so the D minor 7, and you play, sorry about that, so if I just play quarter notes on the D minor 7 and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What we can start to do is try and have the chords on the end of 1. So we go 1 and 2, 3, 4, 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 1 and 2, 3, 4. And you can do that for as long as it takes to feel comfortable playing the chords on the end of 1. And when you can do that over 1 chord, you can then try changing them. So 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4. And you can do that for the position that we looked at earlier down the neck, which is sort of based around the 5th position as well. So that's a good exercise to use. And when you're really comfortable at playing on the offbeats on the one hand, you can then start to look at playing the bass line as well. So that's one right hand technique. Some other jazz guitarists like to use pick and fingers, and they'll use the pick to play the bass note, and then they'll use the fingers to get the chord. So you can do whichever feels the most comfortable to you, really. So there you have it. I mean, I think that should be enough now to practice applying walking bass lines over 2-5-1 situations. If you look on my website, I've also got a little etude wrote out which is a walking bass line over an entire 12-bar blues, so that's really good and useful to check out because we've got some other kind of progressions that we can apply walking bass lines to. Thanks for checking out today's jazz guitar lesson. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button below and subscribe to this channel for more jazz and blues guitar lessons. If you'd like to know more about jazz chords, I have a book called 30 Days to Better Jazz Guitar Comping, which discusses chords and comping techniques in quite a lot of detail and depth, and that comes with audio examples and tab and notation, and you can check that out on my website. There's a link to that in the description box below as well. So thank you for checking out this video lesson, and I'll see you next time.